to be your excited to be your MC tonight. I just want to call out that since we are recording, please turn off your camera if you're not comfortable with your video being on social medias when we do share this. And also please ensure that your mic is muted out of respect to our speakers tonight. So if everyone could just take 30 seconds to check on that, I would really appreciate it. So for those of you that are new to Building Unity is Tim Corden's brainchild, whom many of you may know. Tim has been very gracious in opening the doors of Building Unity to me to exercise some of my passion for leadership in activism. And I find myself very deeply aligned with the mission of Building Unity and the concept in general, as I'm sure you all are as well, since you're here with us tonight. The mission of Building Unity is really to create a global revolution through collective solidarity of all peoples. And our speakers tonight will each be focused on one of our 4 pillars, which are peace, justice, sustainability, and democracy. I have a little blurb that I've prepared on the overall mission of tonight's summit, which I'll share with you all now. The people's struggles for upholding each one of our pillars for peace, justice, sustainability, and democracy is connected. Building Unity's aim to connect various organizations already working on each one of these is to establish the synergy we need to really drive effective change. We advocate for peace by rejecting war and focusing on meeting basic human and ecological needs globally. We demand justice by calling for accountability of oppressive regimes and empowerment of the people. Thirdly, we underscore the urgency of sustainability, aligning with the scientific consensus to reduce emissions and transition away from fossil fuels for a cleaner future. And lastly, Building Unity addresses democracy's challenges, including voter suppression and big money politics, aiming to transform the world into true democracies and not democracies that are for sale to the highest bidder. The concept of Building Unity is that embracing all 4 pillars, peace, justice, sustainability, democracy, is crucial to fostering the unity we need to tackle social, political, and ecological crises. We would like to open with a land acknowledgement. Even though I know we are all virtual tonight, we find it's still important to recognize the Indigenous peoples of the spaces we are gathering from and acknowledge the sacred land and water that form our homes today. Out of respect and gratitude to the Native tribes that were forcibly displaced off of these Wisconsin lands, I'll copy and paste into the chat the full names of these tribes and our full land acknowledgement now, so that you all can read that.
And
this is a good opportunity. Go ahead, Tim.
I was just gonna give you a chance to do that without having to talk. But yes, it's a good opportunity if you're new with us to please enter your name in the chat, your contact information if you choose to share it, but certainly where you're from and any groups that you might work with. And thank you, Sahara, for reading that beautiful beginning and pasting in a more complete land acknowledgement. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just zoom in, not cooperating with me hitting send on my last part of this message. So as soon as it does, all right, there it is. So please take a second to read that. Also a good opportunity for me to bring your attention to the chat again. As you listen to our speakers, please put any questions you have into the chat. Dina, Tim, and I are monitoring the chat throughout tonight to ensure that your questions are being seen. But in the event that we don't have a chance to get to your question during our time together, we will be saving the chat from this meeting. So if you want to make sure your question gets answered, also just include your email just in case we don't get to it on the call. Does anyone have any immediate questions before we jump right in? Okay, cool. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker tonight, Janan Najib, who is speaking on peace. Janan is a tremendous leader whom I've been so pleased to witness in action in the past few months. She is the founder and executive director of the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition, the founder of the Wisconsin Muslim Journal, the founder of the Milwaukee Muslim Film Festival, and the founder of the Wisconsin Muslim Civic Alliance. As if that doesn't already keep her hands full, she also serves on numerous boards, including the Wisconsin Public Radio, and for 20 years has served on the board that creates the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. birthday celebration in Milwaukee. Most recently, Janan is a founder of the Wisconsin Coalition for Justice in Palestine. Janan is also a proud Palestinian born in Palestine. Janan, assalamu alaikum. I am thrilled to listen to you speak tonight, and I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Sahara and and Tim and everyone. I see a lot of friends in the room, so I'm really pleased to be with all of you this evening, and I'm really excited to I was given 10 minutes, so not sure how much I can get through in 10 minutes, but you know, to talk on the topic of peace, it really is not possible without talking on the topic of justice, because you cannot have peace without justice. They go hand in hand. And, you know, the Coalition for Justice in Palestine came about as a result of the really attacks that took place in Gaza by the Israeli military against the civilians of Gaza. The issue of the Palestinian people and the Gazans themselves is not an issue that came about on October 7th. We all know that this is an issue that has been going on for practically a century, and in particular for the last 75 years. This concept of Israel coming in and committing a genocide is not new to the Palestinians, nor is it new to the people of Gaza. For many of you that might not be aware, in particular for the last 16, 17 years, every other year, sometimes every year or so, the Gazans have had to withstand assaults against the civilian population. And it's not a result of anything. It's a result of the policy that Israel has, which their leaders have themselves called it a policy of mowing the grass. You can look it up. It's they haven't been embarrassed about it, because how can you keep the population of the indigenous people down without going in every year or two and basically killing off 1,000 or more civilians, 2,000 sometimes, whatever it may be. And then on top of that, there's what's called the slow death that has been going on for decades in Gaza, where food and medical supplies, etc., can only come in through the Israelis. And they have basically kept the population almost teetering on starvation. The World Health Organization has said that the Gazan population, particularly children, many times are exposed to illnesses that are as a result of malnutrition. So don't be surprised and think that there was a status of peace prior to October 7th. It was a slow death, and every so often they would come in and bombard, and nobody ever paid attention. Nobody really cared. The only time the world paid attention is when hostages were taken. And then we also have to mention that that particular area is not a place of simply civilians. The reason that hundreds of soldiers were able to be taken is because it's a military base. That is often the location from which a lot of the military will attack Gaza. That's also the location where the Gazans are often being monitored, and the soldiers that come in and leave Gaza are coming from that base, including many of the females that were there. Many of them were themselves soldiers, Israeli soldiers. But what I want to talk about is really the genocide that is taking place, and what we can do, because as you can see, it's very frustrating that that the United States continues to support this genocide. And I think the reason is, just as we just heard the land acknowledgement, to acknowledge that what Israel is doing is to acknowledge the creation of the United States. All of these European colonialist powers that have colonized indigenous people use really the same tactics. What is encouraging to all of us is really the efforts that have taken place around the world by people that have stood for Palestinian rights, that have been out on the streets, by social media, because definitely the mainstream media and those that are controlled by the West, in particular the United States and Britain, etc., have not been presenting a fair representation. We're also highly encouraged by what South Africa has done. Who best to bring Israel to the International Court of Justice except South Africa? We all know that that South Africa suffered under a brutal apartheid system for 350 years. And both Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu had declared Israel an apartheid state long before the 5 or 6 international human rights organizations declared Israel last year to be an apartheid state, which included 2 Israeli human rights organizations. And so to have this African nation come forth and bring forth such an amazing presentation, detailed presentation about the genocide that Israel is perpetrating against the indigenous Palestinian people, is something that we should be encouraged, that should encourage us. Let's not be too optimistic, because unfortunately this is also a political type of thing, in the sense that the judges that are present often will vote according to their countries and not necessarily according to what is morally right. But it will go down in history, and it will always be very clear that it was South Africa that brought Israel to The Hague and to hold it accountable. So when we talk about peace, that can only be as a result of justice, which means that the Palestinians need to have their liberation. They need to be able to also go back to their villages and their towns, and to be able to have their homeland. The Palestinians have lived as Muslims and Christians and Jews for centuries. There are Palestinian Jews. It was not until the European Jews came in and Britain And Europe decided to create this colonialist entity in the middle of the Arab world, this European colonialist entity, that all of these issues began. Because as we know that just the same historically, whenever you have a colonialist power, their role is to get rid of the indigenous people and take over that region. But the Palestinians have resisted. The Palestinians outside the country continue to keep attention on this, joined by many, many allies. And I think that what is unique and different, besides the utter brutality of what has been going on, is really the fact that for the first time, Israel has been really uncovered. They have been uncovered in a way that I think it is difficult to walk back, because, you know, once you're literate, you can't go back to being illiterate. And so our responsibility is not to give up, not to be deterred from continuing to push the correct narrative and the accurate narrative, to push for the rights of Palestinians, and to make sure that the voices of the Palestinians continue to be heard everywhere. And so I know that some of you live in areas that are more rural, that might not have, you know, Palestinians or many individuals that can share this kind of information. But we encourage you to continue to educate, whether it's writing letters, op-eds to the, you know, to the editor, whether it's speaking to groups, whether it's creating virtual presentations with churches, with groups. We're willing to come in and to speak to these groups. The important thing is to continue to push that, to continue to contact your elected officials, you know, every single day, if need be, every single day, to put pressure on them. It takes 2 minutes to leave a message for the senators, for your elected representative. But really, we cannot sit back. The Palestinians are depending on us to stand up for them, because as we can see, what's going on is absolutely just a vicious and brutal and racist genocide with utter disregard for human life, and the intent of killing, where over 70% are women and children, is very clear. This is how you prevent the continuation of a people, by killing the women and killing the children. This is their aim, to kill the future of the Palestinians. And I was actually asked just briefly, and I know just if you can just let me know when my time is up, because I can talk for hours. I was asked to also talk very briefly about some of the things that we're seeing happening now with, for example, Yemen. And the attacks on Yemen. So we need to note that Yemen was turning back ships that were headed toward Israel, because many of them were ships carrying armaments. But the Yemenis never killed people, whereas our government went in and began bombing, because, you know, the Red Sea passages, and the Red Sea belongs to the US and Britain. God forbid that they should belong to the people that happen to be there. And so the idea was to bombard them, but it's not just simply a case of bombarding to open those lanes, because we know that Israel is also bombarding Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Israel has also gone as far as bombing Damascus in Syria. And so one of the things that we need to realize about the bigger picture is that one of the things that Israel has been wanting to do for many, many years since the Iraq War is to demolish Iran. Iran is one of the only powers in the region that continues to bring up the issue of the Palestinians and continues to, at least verbally, really attack Israel. As we know, Israel has done many things, including assassinations of leaders within Iran, scientific leaders, so many scientists that have been killed by Israel, because Israel is trying to pull Iran into a war that the United States will eventually end up fighting. And it will be our soldiers and our men and women that end up dying, just in the same way with Iraq, you know, those fake weapons of mass destruction. Let's not forget that overwhelmingly almost all of the neocons that pushed that war happened to be dual Israeli-American citizens. Also, you know, you had people like Judith Miller of the New York Times that put out a scathing articles about the weapons of mass destruction that Iraq has, that ended up being debunked. Also a dual Jewish, dual Israeli and American citizen. So what we're seeing is efforts to draw Iran into the war, because Iran continues to have one of the largest oil reserves. And also, in order for Israel to really have control of the region, which means the United States will really have bases all over that entire region, is by demolishing Iran. Iran knows this, so they have, whereas they have verbally, you know, condemned Israel, condemned the United States, but they have not taken military action, because one step and it's going to lead to the war that Israel has been wanting for years. And so we need to all be aware of this. This is actually one of the end plans that is being planned. It's not just about the Palestinians in Gaza. It's about taking control of the entire region. And Israel alone will not take on Iran. They want the United States to do it. And by bombing Hezbollah, who are Shia, by bombing in Syria, who are Shia, and by bombing who they believe in Gaza to be supported by Iran. We don't know if they are or not. So they know Iran is also Shia. This is a particular sect, in the same way that you have, you know, Protestants and Catholics, and governments for so long use the divide and conquer tactic to control certain groups. And so by attacking members of the same sect as Iran in Syria, in Lebanon, etc. In Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen are part of the same sect. Again, this is all part of the effort to draw Iran into the larger battle. Something that we need to be well aware of, and to be aware of the kind of really immoral and unethical tactics that are being used simply to control another people and control an entire region. I can go on talking forever, but again, I realize you have other speakers, and I don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, I want to encourage folks to drop their questions in the chat as well. But just to kick us off, I will ask one, Janan. In the beginning, I know that you mentioned you cannot talk about peace without discussing justice. And it reminds me of the Dr. King quote, which I'm sure you're familiar with, about a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. And I personally believe we cannot have a permanent ceasefire forever and always unless we bring forth justice. What, in your experience, has been beneficial in reaching people to understand that? And how do you hope that people support Palestinian people moving forward in helping people understand how to accomplish justice so that we can sustain permanent peace?
Well, I think here in the United States, again, it's a matter of continuing to bring this issue up, continuing to hold Israel accountable, regardless of how our government stands. Don't think, without a doubt, we have been having across the country, we have been having an effect. The fact that many of our elected officials can't go anywhere without people chasing them down and bringing up the issue of Palestine. We need to continue to do that. The other thing is that we cannot be silenced. As we know, there have been massive efforts to silence student groups, to close down student groups. People have lost their jobs simply for posting on their personal Facebook pages or tweeting something. This is not something that you would have expected from had it been on any other topic, but because the pro-Jewish, the pro-Zionist contingent feel that they are losing control of the narrative that they have controlled for so long. We need to keep chipping away at that. We need to keep educating. We need to keep sharing information. I was on training this morning that we're talking about. They did a survey, and they found that on this issue, the most effective things that move people that don't know a lot about the topic is not so much understanding the politics. Most people just are clueless about politics, but sharing stories of children, their families, their aspirations that have been killed, for example, sharing those kind of stories, putting it in the context of, well, we want to see the hostages released, but we need to have it so that it's, there's something equal that's taking place, and putting it in these contexts. So understanding what works with those members of the general public that really don't get politics and don't have a stomach for politics. Many of us, we breathe politics, but there are tons of people in our country that, their whole idea is going to work every day, coming home, watching the football game, and this is just an inconvenience. So we want to talk about it in ways that resonate with them, and any opportunities we have to raise the issue of Palestine and to push it through elected officials is an opportunity that we must take. And I think that the Coalition for Justice in Palestine, what has been phenomenal about it is that, we started as a group, the very next day, we started as a group of maybe 10, 12 organizations. We're at like 60 organizations now. And I'm really hoping all of the phenomenal organizations that are here today, Wisconsin Voices, all of the different groups will seriously consider joining this, because our goal is really to bring peace to the Palestinians and bring liberation to the Palestinians. And when we all work together, there is power and the opportunity for success far more than when we are individual organizations. So if you feel strongly about the Palestinian cause, I really, really encourage you to become part of this movement. we can make a difference. And I am feeling hopeful for the first time, as horrible as this tragedy is, but I'm feeling hopeful that we can make a difference in our lifetime.
Thank you. Are there others with questions? Because I feel I want to hog my position as the MC to ask them. I know you all have them, so let's not be shy.
So I have one. I didn't put it in the chat. I'm Tamara, and I'll be speaking next. But just, I heard there's so much information, and thank you so much for really taking all you can to make this better for everybody. But my one question is for someone listening, what's the quickest, fastest way, besides writing your representatives, how can they get connected with community? What community organizations would you encourage people around the state to connect with so they can be a part of this movement as well? I have two people I love dearly that are just distraught every day about this. And I keep saying, get engaged. So I just want to ask what you would recommend, Janine, for somebody to get involved, to go to a meeting, to be somewhere. Those two folks right now are in Fond du Lac. So if you could tell us the closest place or however that might look, that'd be great.
Well, the Wisconsin Coalition is statewide. And so, and that's part of that's one of the things about it, is that that way we are able to have organizations that are close together, connect together, because we have that, and whenever possible, we'll go to Madison. Madison folks will come to Milwaukee, for example. But definitely we need to know who we are. I myself learned of many organizations that I had never heard of before. You've got Dina there, and she's telling me about what they're doing out in Viroqua, and I'm like, what the heck? This is amazing, So you would be really surprised at the different groups that are out there doing good work. But when you do it together as groups together, there's just more power in that, and to join really the coalition, because we have ongoing meetings, and we plan actions, and we plan events, and some of them are statewide, and we learn from each other. So I really would encourage you to do that.
And then we have two other questions. I will present Gloria's question first, and then I'll address Norman's question before I pass it to you, Janine. Gloria is asking, is there an organization to donate to for Palestine and Yemen? Is there one that you would suggest?
There's a number, including the UN organization UNRWA. I think that's a good one. One of the medical organizations that we've been donating to is Med Global. There's several. There's Islamic Relief, but I think that any of these they're on the ground working, waiting to be able to get in. So these would be good choices.
Awesome. So Norman says, this perspective feels like a one-sided view of the Israeli-Hamas conflict between two ethnic/religious tribes who both claim hereditary/historic rights to the region. What are the political justice solutions we should lobbying our government to act on? So I want to address the beginning part of the question first. Norman, first of all, I want to thank you for being here to listen to Janine's perspective. It is her factual perspective as a Palestinian woman of what the reality is in Palestine today, and has been since before October 7th. I think we should be very careful with the words that we use. I think conflict really underplays the genocide that we are seeing today and the historic apartheid conditions and occupation that Palestinians have lived under. There is a very unequal distribution of power in the region, and conflict really undermines the level of authority that Palestinians have in present day and have since the Nakba in 1948, 1947. So I want to encourage you to kind of read more about and listen more to Palestinian speakers just like Jenan about their perspective. And please feel free to supplement it with the perspectives of Israeli historians themselves. Ilan Pape is a good resource. Gabor Mate is also a great resource. You know, this is not just a one-sided biased perspective. Everything that Jenan has said has been based on fact. So Jenan, I'll pass it over to you. What are the political justice solutions we should be lobbying our government to act on at this point?
Well, this is and thank you for mentioning the, you know, the many scholars and writers, and Norman Finkelstein, whose family were, you know, died in the Holocaust, is another excellent person to listen to and to read many of his books. There are so many, and it's not, you know, I would like to just mention something about the beginning of the question. The idea that it's an Israeli-Hamas conflict, you know, in the West Bank, over 600 Palestinian civilians just within these past few months, most of them children, have been killed, and over 6,000 have been taken and imprisoned. And many of these have been killed by and supported. Their killing supported by the settlers, the Israeli settlers, many of them coming from the United States or from Europe or from Russia. Hamas doesn't exist there. This is not an Israel-Hamas conflict. This is Israel's effort to wipe out the Palestinian people. That's basically what it is. And the idea that the claim is somehow hereditary historic rights to the region. Palestinian Jews lived for centuries in Palestine and are Palestinian. But it's the European Jews, because Europe wanted to get rid of what they called their Jewish problem. And so, in fact, a number of places were considered, including Uganda. And this is something you can easily read about it. But then they decided that they were, for a variety of reasons, going to choose Palestine. And so it's really the European problem that created this. You know, the Balfour Declaration. This is something that just has been for 75 years. Those that, you know, there are of course some of those Jewish individuals that claim that they have a hereditary right, that God promised them this land like 4 or 5,000, how many thousands of years ago, kind of as if God is a real estate broker and gives people plots of land based on ethnicity rather than piety, which would make God kind of racist, in my opinion. So I think we need to think about that, and it also disregards the many different empires throughout history that existed, and the fact that people intermarried, you know, people changed religions. To think that because for 300 years at one point in their history, the children of Israel, as they were called, who were the Jews, Israel, of course, being the name of Prophet Jacob, the idea that because they lived there for 300 years, that somehow that makes it okay for Europeans, that Jews, to come 5,000 years later and take over a land that is occupied and has been, you know, lived on for thousands of years by another people, just due to the change in how civilization takes. It shows utter ignorance of history, and utter ignorance of civilization and how that works. So I just wanted to make that clear. as far as the political solutions we should be lobbying our government to act on, they need to be honest brokers. You don't claim that you're crying for Palestinian civilians while you are ignoring Congress and sending all of this bombs and military armaments to destroy a civilian population. The Palestinians have been asking for decades to have the United Nations as an arbitrator there, to be able to have their peacekeepers in the region, and Israel has always refused, and the United States has refused, because then all of their genocide and their war crimes will be uncovered. Who would not want, if they were really looking for peace, who would not want for UN peacekeepers to be there as a process takes place? And the Palestinians have always asked to go back to the decision by the United Nations, if they're going to go back to 1948, to the boundaries that were set by the United Nations, so the Palestinians can have an independent country. But Israel believes that the Palestinians need to be in Bantustans, and if you look at how they look right now, there are over 100 checkpoints set up for Palestinians. You cannot go from your home to your school without going through checkpoints that sometimes they'll close down and you can't get to school. I saw this. My aunt died waiting at a checkpoint to go for dialysis. This is the brutality of the Israeli military and the Israeli occupation. So our government needs to be an honest broker. They need to stop sending military armaments to kill the Palestinians, and they need to require Israel uphold the UN resolutions and the boundaries for the individual states, and Jerusalem needs to remain a place that is open to all, because as we have seen, that Israel refuses to respect the rights of Palestinian Muslims and Palestinian Christians.
Thank you, Jeanette. We have time for 2 more questions. Esty, I know you've had your hand raised for a second. I apologize, I did not see. Go ahead.
Yes, hi, from Mexico. I want to make a statement and then ask a question. I'll be brief. So Janan mentioned the oil in Iraq, and there's also oil and gas in Gaza and under the waters right next to Gaza, which is something that is practically unknown, but it's been part of a Western and Zionist plan from the times of Balfour working with Herzl. Balfour being the British lord who gave Palestine to the Zionists, and Herzl is the originator of Zionism. So this is a plan that has been on paper for a long, long time. It still is going on. And I believe that there's also a plan for a canal by Gaza to move this oil. So I believe that this is part of what is going on, and this is also part of why Biden so enthusiastically is allowing and supporting the genocide. So that's a statement, and Janan, I'm sure you have something to say about that. I have a question that is kind of esoteric, and if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to, but I'm a member of a group of descendants of Holocaust survivors who are writing a statement now for Holocaust Remembrance Day about genocide, and us not agreeing to have our ancestors and our experiences as second and third generation used to allow for the current genocide. And there's this debate about So in the part that I wrote, I mentioned that 70% of those who have died are babies, children, women, and elders. And there's a pushback that by saying that we represent Palestinian women as victims, so we should not say that because it's been Orientalism. And to me, if we don't say that, we are participating in hiding the fact that Palestinian women are targeted by the Israeli military. So I wonder if you have an opinion on that, and if so, what it is. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And you're currently in Mexico?
I am, and it's warm here, and my mouth hurts because I'm here for dental work.
Well, lucky you.
It's nice. It's very nice here.
Right, right. Regarding the gas in Gaza, absolutely. And we've known this, and we know that this is part of the plan and why they want to completely clear Gaza. The other thing that maybe many people don't know is that they have been encouraging Egypt. Egypt is, because they have it's a non-representative government, and that really took power in a coup. What they're trying to also convince them is that if they allow the Palestinians of Gaza to go to the Sinai, that the United States and all the European countries will waive all of the debt, which is billions, that Egypt has. Now, the Palestinians don't want to go live in Gaza because because most of the 80% of the Palestinians in Gaza are themselves those that were cleansed from 1948 and 1967. Some were able to go out of the country, besides those that had been murdered and killed during the first Nakba, and then in 1967 again. So they don't want to leave, but the idea is to make Gaza so uninhabitable that they have no choice, that there's no, they're not going to allow their children to starve to death that way. So the idea is to get them into Sinai, which is a desert, and basically leave them there, and to turn, just like Netanyahu said, to turn Gaza into a parking lot. What basically they want is to turn Gaza into an area that will be a seaside resort for some, and also they will then take over all of the gas reserves there. And regarding your question regarding what you're writing, no, I think it's important to say that Israel is specifically targeting the women and children. There's an agenda behind this. This is how, when you commit a genocide and you want to ethnically cleanse a people and prevent them from continuing their lineage, you attack the women and the children, who are the ones that have babies, and the children grow up and then have families as well. It's been just absolutely heartbreaking to see all these young mothers and children, and the brutality with which they have been killed. So I personally don't see any problem with that.
Okay, thank you. I think we had one more question. It was regarding, let me scroll up to see it again. John asked, I think we can say protesters don't apologize for resistance fighters, but we don't say we support them. Should we? I guess to phrase it another way, how do we support Palestinian resistance without having a target on our backs as well?
Yeah, I think that we know that it's well known that an occupied people have the right to resist. It's not the right of the occupier to tell the occupied how they should resist. You know, we still to this day, because Israel, we know, is untrustworthy. They originally said 1,400 were killed, then it became 1,200, then it became, you know, the numbers kept changing, because what was realized is that many of those burned to death and killed were actually killed by the military themselves, because they came in, and they were just given instructions to shoot and to kill. So it's Hamas had said that their agenda was to take back hostages, because they don't have any, I mean, it's not to in their interest for, you know, they're not going to get anything for people that have been killed, but their interest was really hostages. What actually happened, I don't think we're ever going to fully know what it is. But if we're going to talk about resistance, you know, nobody ever said about the Jews during the Holocaust that you know, during the uprisings, for example, in the Warsaw Ghetto and elsewhere, that, oh, these are terrorists. They were in a concentration camp, and the Gazans are in a concentration camp. What means to resist? We can't say, but I think for us, what our goal it really is, that let's put Hamas aside. What about the 25,000 civilians? Let's not talk about Hamas, the 25,000 civilians. And this BS excuse that, well, you know, they are amongst the civilians. Let's just turn this around for a second. If Hamas had entered, if 10, even 10, 20, 30, 50, Hamas fighters had entered a massive, you know, apartment building in Israel, would Israel choose to bring down the entire apartment building with all of the Jewish residents and you know, bring down all the buildings around it out of fear that, well, maybe there are some Hamas fighters? Or are Jewish lives more sacred than Palestinian lives? So I think that that's what we need to ask. Let's not get into Hamas. Hamas was actually supported by Israel at one point against the PLO, because they wanted a counter to the PLO. So what Hamas became is not, you know, is not our concern. We have nothing to do with Hamas. What our concern should be, what about the civilians? What about the ethnic cleansing that is going on? Is that justified? And I think that's what our focus should be.
Thank you very much, Jeanne. I can't thank you enough. I can appreciate how activating and draining pouring yourself into this work must be. So thank you again for speaking with us tonight. I think this was an important discussion, and hopefully you can sit back and enjoy the rest of our speakers tonight. So let's move right along to our next speaker. I'm actually very excited to hear from Tamara Oman. Tamara is a peer support coordinator with EXPO, which stands for Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. And they're speaking with us on justice tonight. Tamara knows firsthand about the cruelties of our criminal justice system from both direct experience inside and outside of prison. And they've been working in this space for 20 years. She works very hard to amplify the voices of fellow impacted people. And as a united force, EXPO is dramatically changing the broken and cruel criminal justice system. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your story tonight. Tamara, I'll pass it over to you.
Wow, thanks so much. And Jeanne, wow. And all of these injustices, right? These awful, terrible, devastating things that are happening. It's really difficult to consistently step in front and have these conversations, and we can have all the experiences in the world, and it's heavy. And so thank you for for your willingness and everybody here willing to dive in and challenge ourselves to expand what we know or don't know or question or learn. I want to say thank you to everybody for being here tonight. What I'd like to do first, though, if we wouldn't mind, is I want to take a moment of silence. I'm going to already get choked up for the people that Nan was referring to, for the folks that are part of those other communities that are battling this same thing when I think about when we have these conversations about racism and why people are dying in the United States that are Black and brown, for all these different things. There are folks that say, but I'm not the one doing it. It's like, how do we do this together so that nobody is losing their lives over any of this, right? And honor that. So I want to take a moment of silence, and I would ask that you would lift up in your heart, in your spirit, your prayers, your thoughts, however you do that, who's not ever going to make it to a conversation like this, right? Who's never going to get to a table like this, who's never going to be, who's out there for me, from where I work from, substance abuse, mental health, lost, broken. Some woman's trapped in a house tonight by, her, not of her own will, and just the suffering that we're talking about. I'd like to take a moment of silence, just collectively bring our hearts and minds to this space. And whatever somebody's talking about, can we put ourselves in their shoes? Can we develop the empathy to be present for that, so we really can build unity and really make a change? So I'd like to take a moment of silence for that. If there's anybody you want me to lift up in thoughts and prayers, please drop their name or initials in the space. But I just want to take a moment of silence. It's heavy. Thank you. This week, I've lost 3 people that I love or have known or walked with. Just in this, just in my little tiny group of folks that struggle with suicide and mental health and addiction. And really, for me, it's the loss of the ability to be connected to believing that we're worthy human beings, whoever we are. But for us, from the justice lens, Expo's statement is, you have the right to not remain silent. That is one of our taglines. We get arrested and it's like, you have the right to remain silent. No, we have the right to not remain silent. We believe in the human dignity of formerly and currently incarcerated people and recognize they come from and are part of our communities. We believe men and women with conviction and arrest records should be viewed as valued human beings, members of families, and assets to all communities. I just wanted to say what our beliefs are about that. And when you were talking, Jen, I was just thinking about how all of what we're talking about tonight, and you had talked about justice, is connected to everything that's going to be spoken about this evening, right? There isn't a community that's not impacted by some of this, and particularly incarceration. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is, we're really in this together. And I loved what you said about how do we get on there? There's more movement and numbers, but I think we also have to know the story. So just briefly,
I'm so sorry, Tamara. Forgive me for interrupting. I've just learned that Tamika Vukovic, who's one of our speakers tonight, and I apologize if this is not what I should be doing, but I don't know what to do. She only has 10 minutes, and it seems like it's right now. And if you're flexible, Tamara, we
let's
can
not talk anymore, Tim. Give Tamika the space. Go.
Thanks, Tamara. Tamika, are you here?
Yes, I am here. And first of all, Tamara, I and the whole group, I really want to apologize. I have stepped out of my Common Council meeting because I believe this summit is very important, and talking the things that we are talking about is very important as well. So I kind of took a recess out of my Glendale Common Council meeting to come in here and just share some of the experiences that I have. And one of the themes that I think I have I've gotten today, I was with the motorcade for the vice president today. And that's why you will see me, this won't happen again. So you guys better take pictures right now. So, but one of the things that I was listening to her talk on her speech on, she's doing a reproductive right justice tour, celebrating the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And as I was listening to people from all walks of life, women talk, the one thing that kept building in is that we have to create urgency when we're protecting our democracy. Some of the things that we don't quite understand is, and because we all are involved in it, it's like, why don't people care? Why do I have to beg them to come out and protect their own rights and protect their own democracy and protect that? Well, because most of these people say their rights have been taken over and over again. What's one more right? I've heard that. I've also heard that I don't have the energy to fight this fight anymore. Doing this work is tiring, but I think one of our main focuses as we're trying to, I always say our pillars, and people get sick and tired of hearing the pillars from Wisconsin Voices, but I think this is the whole kit and caboodle: protect democracy, build community, teach advocacy. We need to teach how to build community. We need to teach how to protect our democracy. We have to teach why it's important to protect our democracy. All these, I've been in this, I've been listening to people and they're like, why should I do this? Why should I want to protect immigrants' rights? Why should I want to protect LGBT rights? Why am I concerned about what's happening in the Gaza Strip? It's not affecting me. And I already have a horrible life, or I am struggling now. Why does this affect? But it does. Every single thing that this country does affects everybody here, one way or the other. It's a trickle-down effect. I remember I say this story a lot when they started going after LGBT rights. People were like, that doesn't affect me. I don't care. That's not me. But all of a sudden, then they started going after interracial rights, or being able to marry interracially. Well, that affected me. And I'm like, oh, I'm upset. And then in some states in the South, it even got into, you can't marry any interfaith. So if you're Catholic or Lutheran, if you're Muslim and Christian, you can't marry within interfaith. Now people were in an outrage, but you should have been trying to protect the first right that was going to be gone before it trickles down to your right that you actually have or you need to do. So I think overall, when we're talking about protecting democracy, building community, doing what we need to do, we have to take out of what's important to us and see what is being attacked. And because it might not be something that is important to us, but it's important that it's being attacked or it's trying to be reversed. Let's work on those things. Let's work on those rights, because if we stop it now, we won't have to eventually wait for it to happen to us. In regards to this voting, we have to show people why they need to vote. We can't just say, this is bad, this is horrible, this is what it is. We have to go to individual neighborhoods, people, and show them how this thing affects them. Because right now, that's the mentality of people. They're like, it's not affecting me, so why should I care? Because we've had so many times where we didn't care about other people's rights and we had to wait and wait and wait until it affected us. I just really, it was amazing to watch people come together. And there was, this was a presidential, it was an official visit. It wasn't a campaign visit. This was an official visit. And I watched women of both parties there because they were trying to protect the right of women and reproductive rights. So I think trying to find some issue-based stuff to work on, show people why this is why we have to protect our democracy, show that it will affect you eventually, is the key to doing all this. I did not mean to be disrespectful, Tamara. I apologize for having to stick in. Does anybody have any questions for me? Or any or concerns or anything I said that they don't agree with? Let's, have a little bit of a discussion to see, are we in the right spot? Are we doing what we need to do? I can't see everybody, but I see some powerhouses in this room that have been working tirelessly across the state. And I see them. I'm just saying hi to all of you, and I won't name any individual people, but this group of people have been working really hard, protecting democracy. You're keeping your pillars. You have your 4 pillars that you're using. I don't know if you call them pillars, but I'm going to call them pillars. And networking with all these different people. There's 40 people on this call. That's a lot. Think about it. If you touch 5 people, that's a lot of people you've touched. Each of us, 5 people. Any questions, concerns, comments for you as I try to do the best thing I can? There was let's see, perhaps, what is this? Perhaps, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to it.
Yeah, I can read
Perhaps
it for you,
instead of
Tamika.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I can help you. Charles says, perhaps instead of talking about Black LGBT and the labels that are using to divide, and talk instead about human rights that should unite us. If I might respond to that quickly before you do. Yeah, I hear where you're coming from, Charles. I think a lot of times these identities are important because we do live in a society where race is real. Gender identity, sexual orientation, these identities are real, and having the language to describe them so that we can come together in unity is important. But I'll let you respond to that, Tamika.
I find it, I find it that the people who usually want to drop the labels are the people who don't have the problem with the labels. They don't have that problem. They're not going to be Black. They're not going to be Latino. They're not going to be people of color. They're not going to be marginalized. I'm just going to be frank and honest with that. I do agree to a point, because I used to say when people said I'm colorblind, well, you're not seeing who I am or a part of who I am, but they actually literally may not see my color and just see only me. So I stopped saying that. But in this world, that's a division among progressive people. The human rights, we've been fighting for human rights, but LGBT, Black, Latino always get moved in. Let's look at the women's right movement. They were right there in the front, Black and white women fighting tooth and nail. But at the end of the day, who gets the right? White women. And Black women didn't get the right to vote until the Civil Rights Act. So when you say that, it's historical that certain groups will fight and fight and fight. And then when they get the chance or they get there, they leave the Black and brown out. They leave certain people out. So Charlie, I understand what you're saying. I know it's a kumbaya, you're trying to be like a kumbaya moment, and human rights are an issue, but we're not ready for that yet. We're not there yet, in my opinion.
I have a question to maybe keep the ball rolling. And I know you're limited on time. But I would like to ask you, how do you propose that we uphold democracy when it feels a lot of times our elected officials are voting for the PACs that support them and fund their campaigns, and not necessarily representing the interests of their constituents? Specifically, I'm talking with regard to AIPAC and how many Democrats are following the slogan to abandon Biden because we chose a president that has not represented the interest of his people. And so how do you see us upholding a democracy in November and having any kind of bipartisan choice when it does not feel the people are empowered when you have groups like AIPAC that are influencing our elected officials? Does my question make sense?
It makes perfectly sense. I'm an elected
Okay.
official. And if you asked me if I would take one of their PAC checks, exactly, I was like, hell yeah, I'll take that check. Will it change who I am and what I do? Absolutely not. So if they want, and this is just me, I've been doing this for a long time, or at least 8-9 years. I don't care who gives me money. It's not going to change what my stance is, my heart is, and who I believe. That's not everybody. But then I say the people that are here have to start with their local officials. Start with your local officials, trying to make sure that they do what you ask. Because it does go bottom up. You get those local officials listening to you, hearing what you're going to do. And if you don't like it, find somebody else to replace them. Now, right now, I honestly believe this is a dangerous conversation we're having right now when it comes to, there's only basically one candidate for the Dem Party, and we are nonpartisan. So I'm just saying there's one candidate for the Dem Party. There may be some independent candidates coming out of, and I don't know exactly when, and then they're still trying to figure out who the Republican candidate is going to be. But if we write our values down and we mark down where is the person that most hits our values, they will never be 100%. Between the two candidates, we have to mark it down. Is this part of it? And then go from there. We can build a different, and we can try to build a different political state as we go. And I think we've done a lot between 2016 and now. Some of it went the opposite way, but I still believe that there's an independence there. I think that's why we got the president in 2016 that we did, because people wanted independence and not just a cookie cutter person. It just went a different direction than I would have thought. But we can't keep stopping. We can't, if we're going to work on this, we have to work on it wholeheartedly from the bottom up. In 9 months, we're not going to change a whole movement. But if we start now in 4 years and not stop and keep going, because I remember when the movement started, when Bernie ran, and I'll be really quick, there was a movement that came and it stopped. And then they wanted to try to pick it up 3 years later. You can't stop a movement because the movement's going. And then all of a sudden you want to pick it up a month to a year before the elections. Doesn't work that way. You have to keep that momentum going. And that's where, now this is where I'm trying to go. We started a movement at Wisconsin Voices just to do certain things. We did it last year. We did community building. We're moving into 2024 to keep teaching people, to keep building that momentum. We've gotten a little bit bigger, and then we're going to do it in 2024, but we're not going to stop. We're going to keep doing it in 25 and 26. So we have, and look at all these people with Building Unity and our other partners. You know, Building Unity has what, 50, 60, 70 partners in itself. Wisconsin Voices has about 60 plus partners. That's 120 different organizations working together. And if we can get these movements going, all of a sudden it's a movement, and it's not just a partnership or organization. All of a sudden it's a movement.
Thank you. I know you're limited on time. There's one last question for you. Many people don't want people coming to their door to promote any issue. How can we encourage them to participate or at least listen?
Well, you know, I don't have all the answers. I really don't. But one of the things that I am doing is we started our radio show this week, today actually. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks is be patient with us, because you may not want to. We're going to be knocking on doors because we can't hit everybody. We don't know if everybody understands what's going on, what they're doing, how they're doing it. Do you know what's on the ballot? So we have to hit as many doors as we can until we figure out a system that works, that I say, oh, Joe Blow here, he knows what's going on. I don't have to touch him again. He knows what's going on. He's ready to vote, and he's going to vote. And then I look at the next person and say, you know what? But it's all about conversation. I am sorry, but I have to do this. We have to get people out there. Even be apologetic. You know, I didn't know that you was, you know, you up on your thing. My bad. You know, okay. It's all about how you go about that. And we had a lot of that. We did some assistance in voter registration over the spring, or over last fall, and we knocked on some doors, and I'm not doing this, but guess what? We assisted over 500 people in registering to vote in 6 weeks because of a different attitude. So I think it's about not expecting them to be like us and want to be engaged. We have to have some patience. I apologize for taking up as much time as I did. I thank you very much, Tamara, for letting me slide in. I will be at the next event. It was just, today was hectic, and it's the 2nd and 4th Mondays I have Common Council meetings. So I'm going to slide back in there. Don't tell anybody I came out.
Thank you, Tamika. We'll talk soon.
Anybody, and one last thing, if anybody wants to have another conversation or anything, please, you know, call me, email me, call Latoya. We will come together, and maybe we can strategize about some of these things that we want to do in a smaller setting. Thank you.
All right, Tamara, I will pass it back to you without further ado.
Thanks. So in the meantime, my computer died. So I don't think anything happens by mistake in that sense. So I slipped into my phone. So I wouldn't have wanted to leave you hanging. There's been enough of this. So thank you so much, Tamika. No problem for me. I think we're all in this together. I think our hearts are in this place. Our pain and suffering can be the movement that makes a huge difference, right? And for me, talking about, first, I want to start with just a little overview of the criminal justice system. Well, it's not even just, right? So we know that. So it's ironic that they use the term criminal justice. But in the state of Wisconsin, we spend $1.6 billion, say it again, $1 billion incarcerating people. Anybody want to guess what the recidivist rate is? So the amount in a 3-year period that the individuals who leave a prison on Tuesday morning will come back, that includes revocations. So not a new crime. Anybody want to guess what? So we spend 1.6 billion. Anybody want to guess? What percentage returned to prison in a 3-year period in the state of Wisconsin? I'm asking for some guesses. I'll wait.
60%.
60%. Tim, you've been around a while. Come on now. What else?
70?
70%.
Go up just a little bit
71.
more. So
75.
So it's interesting. And it's not like, here's the thing, if we don't know what's happening, we can't do anything about it, right? Every one of us on here, if you all live in Wisconsin, I know Esty said she's in Mexico. I think she still lives here though. But you know, every one of us are paying for that $1.6 billion. That's not the suffering of the people. That's not, it is the payment to lay people down, to quote unquote supervise them. It is roughly between 75 and 80%. So we incarcerate more African Americans than any state in the nation per capita. That's not accidental. The second largest community that we incarcerate in Wisconsin are our Native American Indigenous friends and family members. We know that if you're going to invest in a business, right? If anybody in here is in business, you are not going to year after year after year after year go, hey, I'm going to keep pouring $1 billion into 80% failure. We're just not. But because people don't know the pathways, who's in prison, why they're in prison, you see a 30-second snapshot about somebody did this. First and foremost, so I've done this work for 20 years. I walked out of prison June 24th, 2003. Prior to prison, my brother killed himself. Both my grandmothers died, and I wanted to die myself. I was addicted, but nobody had ever addressed the underlying trauma that I had experienced in my childhood, which was sexual assault, domestic violence. For women, the pathways to prison, 75% are domestic violence survivors and upwards of 87% sexual assault survivors. So we incarcerate people who have been harmed to the extent that they can't function in a way that's meaningful for them or their neighborhood or their children. So when I think about who's in prison and what do we think about them, and when we're talking about humanity, today we're talking about building unity, seeing each other as each other's. I am my brother's, sister, and friend's keeper. This isn't somebody else's responsibility. And if we're failing at that kind of rate, and we're doing this, and we know it. It's kind of what Janann was talking about. People know if they look at the information, right? This isn't like you said, the last, was it 17 years? I mean, they just keep repeating this cycle. And the other person who, when Tamika talked about, like, we just got to keep educating people and inviting them to see it. But here's the other question I have. How many of you know somebody with a mental health struggle or a substance use issue? Raise your hand. Right. I can't see y'all because I had to slip to my phone, but I'm guessing it's everybody on here. So when you go, oh, those people can't be here, they don't belong here. Those people are the people you just raised your hand about. They are your people. They are our people. They are my sister, my brother, right? My cousin. And we'll say, oh, that's different though. Jimmy's just got, right? And because we look at this, rather than a humanity issue and figuring out what's underlying somebody else's pathway to this, we would rather, and this is what we talked about in politics, I'm going to hire somebody else to fix the problem. If you can't tell me right now, and I'm going to get choked up right now, children in just grade school are training how to survive an active school shooter. Right? So we're investing in prisons. We're failing it at 80%, 70 to 80% rate, including revocations, which is not committing a crime, but a rule violation. And then we're saying we don't have money for families and children in schools, right? But kind of what everybody's talked about today, there's some intentionality when you look at the communities we're talking about, right? So I just want to say, if it were up to what people said about me, I would be dead. And I am so grateful that there are groups like you all who took their evening to come into a space and say, I want something different. I promise you, I can't fix what I did to harm people. When I was in my addiction, I stole money. I stole people's trust. I stole, I did a lot of things trying to avoid never taking care of the trauma because nobody asked. And I have lots of history of lots of stuff. And I think about, I can't fix that, but what I can do, because someone like you all stepped into my life. I see Tom, I see a bunch of people in here from my journey and history that walked with me and said, Tamara, you're not a throwaway human being. I believe in you. And I see you. And they lifted up the things about me that were right. They didn't keep labeling everything that was wrong. My PSI said everything that was wrong with me. There was not one good thing about me in there. And I think about, we are incarcerating 21,000 people and we have 51,000 people on supervision. And I'm going to tell you why Expo does what we do. Because most of us weren't welcomed anywhere before prison. And when we got to prison, we weren't really welcomed there. We were certainly told what we weren't. And when we left, the world said, we don't want you here. And it started with not seeing what happened to many people, and especially in impoverished communities, lack of access to education, slavery, racism, all the isms, right? All of the isms are why we are even having this conversation tonight. But we can't be complicit in it and do nothing. So my invitation to you all is, whatever strikes you tonight, I have, because all my technical difficulties, I have 3 one-pagers for the topics I'm going to just briefly discuss. What I'd rather have is questions and conversation for a few minutes. I know we're running shorter on time, but it's important. I want to be with you, not talk at you. So what I'd like to say for me is, so I'm going to talk about the topics we have, and I'm going to send this to Tim. So if any of you are interested, you can have these one-pagers discussing the campaigns that we're working on. The 4th one is new to us. It's connecting families. But the first one is unlock the vote. Everybody talked about a little bit about voting here. Tamika was talking about going out and getting the votes. I don't know if you all know it, but if you have a felony conviction in the state of Wisconsin, you cannot vote until you are, quote unquote, what they call off paper, which is off supervision. So that's being off parole, probation, or extended supervision. But here's the caveat. Who do you think gets the longest sentences in the state of Wisconsin? People of color, right? So we sentence them to prison to atone for their problem, and then we sentence them again when they get out and say, you have no voice. But you take my taxes before I even get out of the car, right? Taxation without representation. We know about redlining. If you look at all the history, why things are the way they are, they continue to be that way. And this is the extension of that. It's the extension of continued slavery for slave labor in prison. We're not going to go too much into that, but I'll just give you one example as far as that goes for quote unquote slave labor. They have an organization there called Badger State Industries, and every state agency has to buy their furniture and stuff from Badger State Industries, right? And a chair that I could get, which I won't shop at Walmart anymore because I know who's on the list. So, but if I went to Walmart, that chair would be $100, and at Badger State Industries, it'd be about $1,100. And I'll pay the folks who make it 50 cents to $1 an hour. And I'll charge the taxpayers, because we have to have equipment in these places. And I'll pay these people 50 cents, and probably a portion of that money will go to my restitution, my child support, and I might get 7 cents out of it, right? So those types of things that are still existing. So unlock the vote's extremely important to us because there are 51,000 people roughly that are currently living next door to you or somewhere that are paying taxes, taking care of their children, getting charged exorbitant amounts, can't find housing maybe, right, because of all the barriers, but they also can't vote. They can't go to their children's school board and decide who represents their values. But you are taking my money and making me decide, you decide for me who gets to tell me what's okay. And if you've asked me to be part of a democracy, If you want me a part of your community and to act right, then let me be a part of it. Let me be a person who can go to the polls and have a conversation about what's important to me. What did I not know? How do I get the right person in office who will hear what's happening in the communities that people aren't being listened in, right? And when we went through the pandemic, if y'all remember, it wasn't intentional that Milwaukee only had one voting poll place, right? One place to vote in the largest community we have, and had people standing in the, so if you think that that's not, for me, a political move, and we have a lot of great relationships with political folks, but they don't know the story. They don't know our story. They don't know who we really are unless we go out and have a conversation with them and try to build real relationships. I know I'm speaking to the choir in that part, but that is the reality. And for someone like me, Tamika was talking about it, you want me to vote, but I don't have a place to live. I'm not going to eat tonight, and I can't take care of my children. You can't expect me to show up to the polls. I'm in crisis rather than prevention. Does that make sense? If we keep people in crisis, they don't have the ability to think about that their voice matters at the poll. Spending my last dollar for a bus ticket to go vote, to make it even harder, right? Or to get over there, isn't what I can think of when I can't even think about how I'm going to feed my kids. And we often don't have jobs when we get out that are, specifically women, often have service jobs where they're getting, they're serving people food, and they're the primary caregivers of the children when they get home, usually. And 80% of the women in jail have kids. So how do we break that second generation so that $1 billion is invested in families and communities rather than prisons? That's one way, is voting, right? The second one is for ours is locked up on the outside. So in our surrounding states, we have the sixth longest history of extended supervision than any other state. So we're the sixth worst in the country for how long we sentence people for. You do your time in prison, but many of our staff members, at least 3 of them, will never cast a vote and will die on supervision. Even though they're some of the greatest community leaders, the most loving and kind, invested individuals who went to prison when they were young for not having healed trauma. I'm not saying that people didn't get harmed. I am not excusing what happened. What I'm saying is we're not getting out of that if we don't think about that. So some of those folks will literally die never being able to be off supervision, and they pay. So for the neighbors, in the nation, we only monitor recidivism in 3-year periods. So if you only watch how long I do well or don't well for 3 years, do well for 3 years, and you don't think about what happens after that, why do you care if I'm on? Because I pay $20 to $80 a month in supervision fees. I also could be accused, but somebody could be mad at me. My ex-boyfriend could be mad at me, or my ex-girlfriend could be mad at me and call and say, I saw Tamara over here doing this. And maybe all the stability I had goes out the window. It just doesn't make sense. People are living in terror every day that something's going to go wrong and they're going to go back to prison no matter what they did. I'm 20 years out. I'm not on paper anymore, but I still have nightmares about my experience in prison. So, and I wake up panting, and I'm in this movement. So we, in our surrounding neighbors, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, they all cap supervision at 3 to 5 years. So our campaign is to go speak to our legislators, to talk to them about, if we don't measure it, if you don't need to monitor us, if our lives are going well, can we be done with supervision? Because when is your time really done? It's really not even done even after you're off supervision. I got a job to go back to work in prison, literally to get a set of keys to go back in prison to work. And I went to go for housing, and they said, we don't take your kind here. I'm like, the prison's going to trust me with some keys, and you're not going to let me live here? I'll pay you up front. But all of those barriers continue to put taxpayers, public safety is public wellness. It's never going to be incarceration that makes us safe. Never, never. So that's the second one. I'm going to send you one pagers. Again, I don't want to talk at you this whole time. The third one is one of the biggest ones, and one of the biggest ones for everybody in this country, but it's safe, dignified, supportive housing. So right now, I own a home in Fond du Lac, and I'm still paying the mortgage. I could not rent an apartment for what I'm paying for my mortgage, my taxes, and my insurance. If I were displaced today, I would likely be homeless for quite some time. And I have spent the last 20 years trying to create the world I want for all of us, for every single one of us. And I'd be lost if that happened. And so for us, when we leave, the barriers for us are criminal conviction, when it wasn't, our credit score. Do you think I had good credit while I was in the penitentiary? No, they don't get, I'm not earning great credit or being able to pay bills on time. They don't count my paying rent if I got work release. When people are on work release, they have to pay $700 to live in a cell and go out to work, while the taxpayers are still paying for that bed. I'm not sure how that all works. But anyway, so for us, we know, if you know that stabilization, the number 1 and 2 predictors for people returning to prison, this is data, are who you spend your time with and your family. Most women are, so 47.5% of the women released from prison are housing unstable. Again, they're the primary caregivers of the children if we want to break that generational cycle. So let's just say we pay about, it's anywhere between $36,000 and $42,000 a year to incarcerate one person. That's just putting them to bed and feeding them some pretty bad food, right? So, but that's what it costs. Imagine if we were a community that said, you know what, you're my neighbor, you're doing well. Let's pay rent for you for 6 months when you get out, or in a supportive environment. Let's say rent $700 for one person. Let's just say that. I'm not in Dane County. So $700, but we pay roughly $3,000 a month to put them in bed in prison. And we'd save $2,300 per person to invest in just the stability of someone being able to have an address and a safe place to lay their head. Most women return to what they had before because they don't have many options. So they go back to the relationship that likely took them to prison because they don't have anywhere else to go. So I'm speaking specifically a lot about women, not that men don't, but women have the higher risk with the past history of trauma, substance abuse, sexual assault that wasn't addressed, to be in an unstable situation when they get out. And they often then have their kids. So then their kids are somehow in some system. So we're just not winning. Nobody's winning if we don't rethink how we cap supervision, remove this ability for people not to be civically engaged and ask them to be in our community members, but don't let us, and then don't let us live anywhere. We want y'all to do well, but just not in my neighborhood, right? So the beauty is our blessing has been that we are consistently working toward this. We have some real movement on Unlock the Boat. So a way that you could get engaged is join us, write your come to some of our events. We have we have a monthly statewide meeting you're welcome to come to. We have, sometimes they're online and sometimes they're in person. But the way that you can get engaged in doing something about that is talking to your legislators. Talk to one of us. Come to one of our meetings. We'll even host an event if you just want to ask questions. We can have that stuff going. Do we need to go?
I just want to give you like a 1-minute warning. We do need to move on to our next speaker, but for any folks that do have questions, we'll circle back to it at the end if there's time, if folks want to hang out for another minute. Otherwise, if you want to include your email with the questions, we'll certainly get those questions to you, Tamara, to answer them directly.
I just had one more thing that I didn't mention.
Yeah.
And I hate that we ran out of time because I wanted to hear from you all. So connecting families is the fourth thing we're taking on this year. As a result, 1 in 3 families with an incarcerated loved one goes in debt over the cost of phone calls to stay connected to your children, to keep them moving, to talk about their schooling, to stay connected. And that obviously carries the burden is more disproportionately for Black and brown women and their families. Having support from loved ones is an essential human need and the root of all social successes. Research has shown repeatedly that when incarcerated people stay connected to their support networks, they do better both while they're in and when they come home. So we'd ask you to join us. I can't drop anything to chat with this phone, but please just Google Expo of Wisconsin. Any one of us would love to have a conversation with you. Join us at one of the events, show up at the Capitol, but mainly see us as human beings. See us, show up, be with us. We'll be with you because I'll tell you, I'll fight harder now than I ever have for the love and wellness of every human being because I know that I was blessed to be loved by someone enough to still be here. So thank you for your time. I know it was a little disjointed, but thank you so much for everything.
No, you did amazing. Thank you. I certainly learned a lot and I do have questions, but I want to be respectful and introduce our last speaker. I definitely want to hear from them as well. Anna Quet is our last speaker. They also go by Guy Ryder. And they're with us tonight to speak on the rights of nature. They're the founder and executive director of Many-Kanakim, which is a Menominee word that can be translated as Menominee Rebuilders. Many-Kanakim works to remind Menominee people of their ancient understandings of how to live and sustain their lives and our world. They do this by engaging with their Menominee culture and language. For years, Anna Quet has led a number of the Indigenous-led efforts to protect our natural world in Wisconsin and beyond. Today, he'll be filling us in on the rights of nature movement here in Wisconsin. I'm looking forward to hearing more from an Indigenous person directly, so please, Anna Quet, take it away.
Yeah, po so. Wala na case being. Anakwet na takam, Wapasha nitotam, Kashita nitski wakin. I ran in Mauni Wayake Osahitua. My English name, excuse me, I'm just getting over a little bit of a cold. So, my English name is Guy Ryder. My real name is Anakwet. Anakwet roughly translates to really handsome and good looking, as most of you are aware by looking at this video. I'm just kidding. It actually means a cloudy sky. But we started an organization. Well, we started some work on rights of nature, and if you look at rights of nature of Wisconsin.org, you'll find a lot of our specifics. I don't want to get too much into that entirely. You can check out like kind of what rights of nature is. I just wanted to briefly just talk a little bit about my journey to get here and just currently what we're doing. And I'd just like to thank our host here and our MC and all these fabulous speakers that spoke before me. I learned a lot here listening and there's so much I could talk about and so much questions I had and things like that. Maybe we'll get another time to really have that conversation. But so my journey into the rights of nature started with us as a opposition to us Many-Kanakim, which roughly translates to the Menominee Rebuilders. It's an organization located here on the Menominee Indian Reservation. It has an 80-acre farm. We have buffalo here, and we do lots of things around food sovereignty.
I'm sorry, give me 1 second. Could folks please mute their mic? We're getting some feedback and it's a little disruptive. Thank you.
We do we do food sovereignty, youth development, and what I'm kind of been in charge of is environmental justice. It's a little hard to sometimes explain our approach or the way we think of things because of our language is so very much different than the one that we're using. the one I'm using now. We try to do as much as we can with our thought coming from our sacred language. And that language I was speaking when I introduced myself is not some foreign language. That's the original language of this land. The Menominee are the original inhabitants of this area. We don't have a migration story. Our existence begins at the mouth of the Menominee River. Right there by Marinette and Menominee, Michigan is where our oral history states that we began as a tribe. All the other tribes have migration stories, but we don't have one. A lot can be said about us as Menominee people. Lots of things that we've done, lots of things that I've been fortunate enough to hear about from grandmas and grandpas and aunties and uncles. I think one of the biggest ones is we were the first tribe that got terminated in 1953 during the termination era, and through a grassroots effort, we were restored in 1973. It was quite a movement. Some of those leaders are gone, but some are still here, and I'm lucky to know quite a few of them and talk with them. I just mentioned that because I kind of want you guys to understand a little bit where I come from. And Menominees have been here again, like I said, since the beginning. And there's lots of things that we know. You know, we've witnessed lots of things here as our time on this earth, and especially in this area they call Wisconsin. And our language speaks directly to that. You know, our language is a very relationship building language, I would say. This language I'm speaking now, this one you're understanding, is very much a fear-based language. It sees deficits. It's a deficit language. It sees problems and it builds whole things around those problems. So sometimes it's you know, when we're trying to think of things or trying to understand problems, or you know, you got to realize the root of your language and where it comes from, and the filter you're using to understand whatever it is you're perceiving. So I started really like official activist work, although I was involved in the Ojibwe hunting and fishing rights back in the late 80s and early 90s. If some of you folks remember that time, I was involved in you know, the Crandon mine fight, and that was up there at the headwaters of the Wolf River. The Wolf River flows directly through our reservation. Not any way was I like a leader, or any way was I anything other than just a kid there being dragged to it by my uncle and my aunts, really. And then most recently, I was involved and been involved and am involved in opposition to a sulfide mine called the Back 40 mine. And the Back 40 mine is located right on the banks of the Menominee River. And again, like I said earlier, you know, that's the beginning and the origin of our people. It's almost like as if they were going to put a sulfide mine right in the Garden of Eden, if the Catholics knew where that was. So one of the things that has always stuck out, and I know we're kind of getting up on time and I don't want to take too much time, but every time I hear discussions about, you know, who we should vote for, what we should be thinking, what's justice, a lot of times we leave out of the picture our relatives, those animals, our relatives, those plants. We don't, and all those things that make up this thing they call environment. We don't necessarily think about them all the time. And we did a walk from a sacred water walk from our reservation here. One of the most sacred areas here on our reservation is, they call it Kakapekut, but in English they call it Kashina Falls, and it's really at the center of our reservation here. And what makes it so important, one of the things that makes it so important, is that long time ago the sturgeon used to make their way to that place, that Kakapekut, Kashina Falls, and our people would come from wherever they were, and they would come here, and we'd celebrate the resurgence of the fish, but also just, you know, getting over through the maple syrup time and just making it through the winter, you know, and seeing one another again. Well, they put dams up in like 1890 and 1901 or whatever the things were, and stopped that migration of those sturgeon from coming here. That's kind of been a thorn in my side ever since I've known that to have been. And that area right there at Kashina Falls, we took up some water and we did it with our grandmother, Josephine Mendalman Katnup, who is now passed on. And she is the original Mother Earth water walker. She walked around five Great Lakes here, and she carried a copper kettle around each five to raise awareness of the water. And she did it in ceremony. She did it not as a protest, as not as look at me kind of a thing, but she did it as a way to demonstrate that what we're able to do as humans. And she did that at 62. She used to joke about walking through, you know, one hip and two knees and about 10,000 pairs of Nikes. You know, that was one of her jokes she'd always say to us. And when we entertain this walk, and hopefully this gets this point across to you about rights of nature. We gathered up that water there, and in our understanding and our belief, it is the women that carry that responsibility of speaking up for the water, because they were given that gift by the Creator to carry that beautiful water in their vessel when they're bringing life into this world. So they normally scoop that water up and they walk, and you know, us men try to support as much as we can, and we walk side by side with them. And there's lots of things, lots of small things that go into that walk that have a lot of big impact if you really hear it and understand it. I'm kind of skimming over some here just because of time. But I remember, so it took us 3 days to walk up to the mine site from our reservation. It was 126 miles one way. And we did that in 3 days. We were able to walk those miles. It was after some time of walking. At this time, I was not only like organizing or helped to organize the walk, but also, you know, calling ahead for communities that we were coming in and taking care of everybody on the street and making sure everybody's okay, and, you know, doing 6 million other things at the same time. Anybody that does huge events like that, you can definitely relate to what I'm saying. There's always a million things to do and no time to do it. So, you know, and it was on the time of when, like, I was already lobbying federally and lobbying in the state and flying all over the country to talk to people that anybody wanted to hear about what we were doing, and spent a lot of time in an airplane, a lot of time in my car. And I was exhausted, you know, and Grandma Josephine had seen that, and she had said, nephew, hey, why don't you jump in my car? She said, I want to talk to you. And I immediately thought, like, oh, you know, I'm in trouble. What did I do? You know, I must not seen something. And I remember before I jumped in her car, I remember her saying to us, you know, as we're out here walking, you know, this isn't a protest. We're not going to carry signs. Think about what it is you're doing, you know, and why you're doing what you're doing. And she got me in the back of her car. She had said, you know, nephew, I can see that you're really tired. She said, I just want to remind you, she said, nephew, what you're walking for. She said, you know, you're walking for all those ones that can't get up here and walk. All those ones that may be in jail. Maybe they're in a hospital. Maybe they're handicapped. Maybe they're too old. Who knows what the reason. But I want you to think about them. She said, as you're out here walking. She said, because you're walking for those ones. And you're also walking, she said, for those ancestors of yours that are no longer here. You know, you're walking for them. She said, and I want you to think about those descendants. She said, nephew, those ones that are waiting to come here to this earth. She said, keep them in your mind as you walk. You're walking for them. And she went on to talk about the animals. You know, she said, you know, nephew, they can't come to these meetings. They can't write these notes, and they can't tell you how they feel. She said, but you're out here, nephew. She said, think about them as you're walking. Every one of those four-legged animals, and she said, even think of those all those fish in that lake or in the rivers. She said, in the waters, and all those little microorganisms. She said, you know what, nephew, I want you to think about those. She said, think about those as you're out there walking. And she gave me this like 15-minute guilt-ridden speech that I could have probably walked to the moon by the time I was done. I was so fired up about it, and it just made so much sense to me. So I was gonna jump out of the car, and she goes, nephew, she said, before you go, I want to tell you one last thing. She said, I know you're tired. She said, and I know you're doing a lot. She said, but I always want you to remember to be like water, nephew. She said, you know how water, when it gets stagnant, she said, it gets bacteria and it gets dirty. She said, you know what, nephew, I want you to remember to flow in those things. And, you know, for us as Indigenous people, you know, we think of, especially us Menominees, we think of a whole person in 4 aspects: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. And I was thinking to myself as she was telling me that, like, where am I stagnant in my life? And what do I need to do to not become stagnant, to start flowing again? And I don't know how she knew that, how she knew to tell me that, or whatever it was. She didn't really define anything. She allowed me to define what that meant. And I'm going to kind of close with this. But I remember there were times where by myself, and I was coming home from a university or wherever, a talking engagement, and I just, you know, did like one right after another, and I was tired, you know, and thinking of those words that creep up in your mind sometimes when you're pushing for something is, you know, what if I fail? What if this whole thing goes the other way? And I spent all this time, all my heart and soul into this, and what if I lose? What if it's all for nothing? You know, I think about those things, and that moment in my head, and I want to be home. I want to be with my children. I want to be with my wife. I don't want to be out here. I don't have to fight these fights and fight all these things. And I remember hearing my grandmother's voice so vividly with me in my head. You know, remember what you're walking for, nephew. You know, remember to continue to flow. And it was in that moment right there, you know, it just, man, it empowered me, and I felt that uplifting feeling. And I hope that the story shares a little bit of that with you. And I hope you guys that are listening know who you're walking for. And always want you to always remember to be like water and don't get stagnant, you know, and continue to flow. And I know one thing that I was kind of taught was, and I heard this in a speech a long time ago, when you want people to do a task or do something like meaningful like that, don't just assign them things to do and don't just tell them to go get things. It's like as if you're building a boat, right? You don't want them just to get the lumber, you don't want them just to get the nails, but you want to make them yearn for the sea. And I hope a bit that this story here makes you yearn for those natural places, for those relatives of ours that are out there in that environment, that make up our environment. And we think about them every day. And most importantly, think about the water. And we take time to respect that water every day. Will.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful ending. I think that this whole summit was an exercise in going with the flow. We all did a great job in pivoting and holding space for each one of our wonderful speakers. And I know that folks are dropping off as they have other commitments, but did anyone have questions for either Tamara or Aniquette that they wanted to address quickly? Otherwise, feel free to type them out and we can get back to you offline as well. Yeah. Yeah, I really love what you said about making people yearn for the sea. I think everyone in this group here yearns for peace, justice, true democracy, true sustainability and support of our earth. And joining summits like this is part of how we can collectively move towards that and seeing the cohesion between all of these causes. So I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Huge thanks to Tim Corden for creating this space and connecting us. We really appreciate you. Tim, any last words you want to share?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I know that this day is also special for one of our sisters and comrades, all of us really. Pam Richard wanted to share a little bit about this day in history. So Pam, I hope you're still in the room.
I am. I'll make
Oh.
it very short because I don't have to say a lot. It is the third anniversary for the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and that is a hopeful sign for the world that 70 countries have come together and ratified this treaty. So it is in effect. It entered into effect 3 years ago, and there are also 92 countries who have signed. Of course, our country hasn't, or any of the nuclear weapons countries have not signed yet. And we do need to pressure our country. We can do that through Back from the Brink of Nuclear War. And Madison has signed on to Back from the Brink, and so has Milwaukee County. So there is a movement. And if you're interested, tomorrow at 9 a.m., the Union of Concerned Scientists will be announcing the 2024 Doomsday Clock. And last year it was 90 seconds to midnight. We're hoping it didn't go any closer to midnight. There's a lot of fear because of climate change and nuclear weapons and the wars that are going on. So let's just keep aware. And I have to say another positive thing is that I'm in the Alliance for Nuclear Accountability, and we go to Washington, D.C. every year and lobby Congress and educate the congressional members about what's going on in the nuclear weapons enterprise, which unfortunately has been privatized and is sucking trillions of dollars out of our economy. So I can keep you updated on that if you're interested. Just check out peaceactionwisconsin.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. I also want to say thank you to the flexibility of people. I know we cut off Tamara. We put Guy off till the last 10 minutes or so. We had a lot to listen to, and it was so rich. I can see the reactions of people. This has been rich. I wanted to spend some time sharing with you about what Building Unity has planned and how we're going to try to build unity with the people we've heard from, as well as others in the room who haven't had a chance to speak. But I'm not going to take more of your time tonight because we've been on Zoom for 2 hours, but I will, if you registered for this event, and most of you have, I will send out Tamara's one-pagers about the 4 different campaigns they have. I will send out anything that Aniquit will share with me or about how to get to the rights, learn more about the movement for the rights of nature. And Aniquit, I just want to say what grace and what wisdom you shared to really wrap this all together for us. It was such an honor to hear you, and thank you for being so patient with us. We love, and I know Janan had to leave, but she was here for almost the whole thing. And you know, this woman is doing amazing work, trying to stop the genocide in Palestine right now. And of course, Tamika had to leave. And we're so proud of our connection and our partnership with Wisconsin Voices. It's done so much for the Building Unity project. So more coming via email, please. One thing I will say, it's in relationship that we're going to do this, and we need more events. And that's one of the things Building Unity is trying to do, more events where we can hear each other's stories and really listen and get to know each other, because that's how we're going to build a people's movement that leaves nobody out. And that's what I think we're all wanting, a movement that puts every one of us, even those that have been hurt so badly by violence, by racism, by poverty, by, you know, white supremacy, by colonialism, by all the forms, the isms. So I want to just also say one last thing, and then I'm going to turn it back to Sahara. Sahara, you have done a beautiful job moderating this very challenging time crunch and everything, and you've exercised amazing flexibility. Thank you. for your great work. You've been on and you've done a beautiful job. And I'm going to say goodnight and turn it over to Sahara to say goodnight. And anyone's welcome to stay on. I'll stay on till the last person's on, but feel free to leave now after Sahara says goodnight. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have to run. I actually have another meeting, another Zoom to hop to. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. It was my pleasure. I lead meetings all day long at work, and I don't care about that. I care about this. So it's my pleasure to be involved in this work with you all. And I hope to see you all at more Building Unity events and around the community. Have a good night, y'all. Bye.
Thank you, Sahara.
Thank you.
Thank you to our for